Hi, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. So we'll get going, and as we do every day, questions from the previous day, then we'll take the clarifications first. Otherwise, we'll proceed with the next topic for today. Okay, so yesterday what we were doing is we were going into the different steps which data science is supposed to execute. And the first one we saw is that before you take up a project, before you take up an assignment, it's important to understand who is going to be the end user, what is the objective of that project or assignment. And these things will give us the insight into how do we plan our project, how do we plan for testing, how do we plan for deployment. And we have taken a few examples, and then we said, okay, having understood that, what would be the next step? And that is that data munging and data cleansing, because you will receive data from different sources. We need to understand what is that we have got, so that we will be in a much better position to actually perform any function with that data or do any operation on that data. And we saw a few things that we need to do. We used the head and tail command to see what type of records I have got. Then we are able to see what kind of columns we have got. And then if there are any questions on understanding what those columns contain, then we need to go back to the customer or the project sponsor or the domain experts and ask the relevant question, because we should be taking it as a given. It will always happen that we will not receive the entire data in the form that we want. We saw that the income figure was in single digits. So we need to understand what does that represent. Is that a number for in thousands or in millions or 10,000, or it has some other operation has been done on that one? So those things we need to understand. Then we saw that there was one field which was in the string format. So we need to have a strategy as to how do we convert that into a numeric format, because all the data processing algorithms will take as input only the numeric numbers. They don't process the strings. So these were some of the things that we had done yesterday, and that was the first stage of the analysis. And then the second stage of the analysis was to understand the data from the statistical point of view, because we have large amount of data and we need to understand the data and its different attributes. When we say different attributes, it's just like saying that how do we know a person? We know the person by his attributes. So there could be certain physical attributes like how tall he is or what's his weight. There could be certain relationship attributes. For example, where does he work? What is his father's name? What is his spouse's name? Where does he live? So all these are different relationships of that person with different entities. It could be relationships at work, in family, in education. Similarly, for data, we can understand data by certain attributes of it. So just as we have certain physical attributes, we saw that yesterday, that what is the shape and size of the data, what are the different columns. So those were similar to the physical attributes that we have uh, for a person or for any other object. The next stage would be to understand certain relationships that it has. And in case of data, one of the key things is to understand that where is the data centered? That is, uh, if you are, say, if somebody asks you a question that how much time does it take for you to reach your office from home, you would give the most likely answer that, okay, it takes me about half an hour. But it's not that you always reach the office in half an hour only. Sometimes you will take 35 minutes. Sometimes, if there is no traffic, you may even reach in 25 minutes. And on some extreme day when there is a bad traffic, it may even take you 45 minutes. So when we talk about something which is happening at a regular frequency in our real life, then we talk about the most likely scenario, and there is a range of events, or there is a range under which different events can happen, or the same event can happen on different days. So the most likely scenario, that is what is called the central tendency, and the other things which happen around that most likely scenario, that is represented by what we call as the dispersion. So suppose the minimum time you have taken for reaching office is 25 minutes or and 45 minutes, that will be the dispersion. And if it is most likely to be 30 minutes, that is what we call as the central tendency. And we have different measures to quantify it, and today we will spend some time on doing that. So although we talked about the mean median mode, and we saw that how to compute that in the Excel sheet, we had not gone into the definition of that, the formal definition of that, and those are the things that we will attempt today. So as we discussed yesterday, that mean is the term for the average. So average, we know how to find out. We just take the sum of all the numbers and divide by the numbers, that is mean or the average. The other, the other two things, which is also very important in statistics, is called the median and the mode. Mode, you will see that we will not use that frequently in our computations or in our analysis, but median would be used very frequently. And the reason is that median is the middle point of the data that we have. So if you arrange the data in an ascending or descending order, and then we take the middle point, and we will see that why that becomes important. And one of the reason is that the averages are influenced by the outliers or the extreme data. So for example, in this data set that you are seeing, everything is between 1 to 15, but there is one number which is 100. Now that one number 100 is actually influencing the mean disproportionately, because otherwise the average should have been somewhere around maybe 5 or 6, but just this one number is taking my average to 16. So the average or the mean, that is subject to influence or disproportionate influence by some very large number, which we'll see that how to identify them, but they are influenced by some large numbers. And that's the problem with mean. You can't do that with median, because in this case, since we are taking the middle point, even if you have the inflation of the numbers on either side, the middle point doesn't really change. And therefore it's much more difficult to influence the median. And because of that reason, median would be taken as the main measure of the central tendency in many of the cases. So let's go to the worksheet. work again with the housing data set. So I not go through these descriptive things that we had done earlier. Text processing data one. We come to the statistical analysis. Okay, so here's some of these functions. You can also import the library by name statistics, and then we can use certain functions from there. And there are many other functions which are inbuilt in the pandas library, which makes it very simple for us to operate on the data frame that we have created. But you could also use the statistics library. So at some places to demonstrate that, I will use that library, and at some places I will use the pandas library. Just to repeat, as I was mentioning, that in the data science profession, it is more important for you to understand and remember that which are the libraries which I am going to use than the syntax, because of two reasons. Because syntax, and even if you want to remember, you will not be able to remember all of them. You will have to seek help. Uh, so in your mind, you should work with a framework that there are maybe 20% of the commands which I should be knowing, by heart. So if somebody asks a question, those would be in the nature of the frequently asked questions on Python or pandas. There, if somebody asks, you should be able to respond to it. But we should be knowing that 80% of the commands or 80% of the syntax you will not be able to remember, and we don't need to remember. First of all, because there are too many of them, and secondly, because help is easily available. As we have seen that as you start typing, it gives you the entire description of how a particular syntax should be typed out. And the in the notebook, you will get the help automatically. If you're not getting, then after typing out something, you need to press control and space. Then you get that help. So having said that, we have taken a central tendency data. So I have just given a name, CT data, and this is the list which I have defined, which I showed you on the PPT also. Now we just take statistics.mean, and then we pass this variable, and this part is just for formatting. We want to see the output into decimals. So when we run this, we get the mean, what you saw there. Now if this was not 100 but 10, and that's what the more cohesive data would look like, that all of them are in the close range and none of them is actually very much outside that range. The number is coming to 6.78. But if just one number is out of the range, you will see that median does not change, but the mean would change. So median remains the same, but the mean has become from 6 point something to 16 point something. That's the problem that we have with the mean. Now mode is what is that data which is the most frequent one. So here the 3 is appearing 3 times, and that's where the 3 becomes the mode of that. Now as we draw the chart of this data, you will see that this mode will, when we draw a histogram, and we will spend some more time on understanding different types of graphs that can be drawn today, and we'll go a bit deeper into each of them. But in the histogram, when you draw, the 3 would be having the tallest bar, because as when we depict a histogram, as we had done earlier, let me see if it is already available. Otherwise, we will run that once again. when we draw this type of histogram, then what is depicting is first the values on the x-axis and the frequency of that value on the y-axis. So in this case, what this means is that in the data set, the values which are say around 0 or slightly negative and slightly positive, they have a frequency of 120. It means that in my data set, 0 is appearing about 120 times. Similarly, if we take say this value around 60, it is minus 1. So minus 1 is the value that I have in my data set, and the count of the values which is minus 1 is say around 70 or so. That is how you read a histogram. So on the y-axis you have the frequency of the data, and on the x-axis we have the value of the data. Now while drawing this, we had seen this concept of the bins. It means that whatever is the data, it will divide that into 50 bins. So my data may be from say 0 to 1000. It will divide that into 50 bins. It means that 0 to 20, 21 to 40 and so on. And then it will take account of the data elements which are there in each bin. And then on the x-axis, one bin is one vertical bar here, as you can see. And whatever we have on the y-axis, that depicts that how many data elements are in that bin. So here data could be maybe 1.2 to 1.3, and that has a count of around 90. That is how you read the histogram. So the mode, as we can see, that the tallest bar in the histogram will be the mode. So that's very easy to understand. It is the central tendency. We can compute that by using the library statistics, or we have the inbuilt function in pandas. So I just give the data frame name and then say mean. So it will show me the mean of all the numeric columns that we have, and that's what we get here. So it becomes very easy to operate because that operation is being done on the entire data set immediately. So at some places you may like to use the library statistics. At some places you may like to use the inbuilt functions of pandas for getting different measures of statistics. So we can do the mean, median, and as we do the modes actually could be multiple values, because in this data set, let's see what response it gives. Okay, so it shows I found two equally common values. So it is not showing me the number, but once we come to pandas, it will actually show me the mode in this manner. It means that for some data set, there are two modes. For example, here the median income, it is showing me two modes. So the data can be multimodal because the mode is just the count of the frequency, or the how many times a given number appears, and you could have 3 or 5 appearing with the same frequency. So mode is the most frequent one. We need to understand that, but as you will see that we'll not really use it. We'll use the mean and the median in any of our analysis. Then as we saw that not just understanding what is the most likely event to happen, it's also now important to understand that in what range the events happen. Just like I am most likely to reach my office in 30 minutes time, but sometimes it is 25, sometimes it is 45. So I need to understand the range also, and we will go into certain measures of the range, which a few things we have seen, like range will be the max minus min. So here max value would be given to you when we call the describe function on the data frame. Then we get the max and the min. So max minus min is the range in which the events have happened or in which the data is available. Then we can divide that into four parts. So from min to 25%, 25% to 50%, 50% to 75%, and 75% to max. So we divide this into four different parts, and each part is called quartile. So 0 to 25% is the first quartile, and the value that you see against 25% when we call the describe function shows that 25% of the values are below that, and so on and so forth. Then we saw that we can see the range in a graphical form also. We can plot the range. Now, having understood the what is these quartiles, the value at the 75 quartile minus the value at the 25 quartile, it means that the middle half of the data set on each of these features, on each of the columns that we have, that is called the interquartile range. So 75 percentile minus 25 percentile. So you see, I am using two words interchangeably. Sometimes I say percentile and sometimes I say quartile. The percentile means 75%, and when I say quartile, 0 to 25% is my first quartile, second, then 25% to 50% is the second quartile, and so on. So I have here Q1, Q2, Q3, and 75% to max would be Q4. So Q3 minus Q1 is my IQR, or the interquartile range. Now, what we do is that if the data is normally distributed, then there should be very few items which are outside the interquartile range. So that we see by depicting a box plot. So let's see how to read this box plot, and that is also very important for us to understand and remember. So you see the middle one is my mean. That is the average. Sorry, this is the median. So let's go back. I am trying to draw this for median house value. So for the median house value is being shown on the end here. So median house value, the mean is around 21,000. That is what is being shown here, around 21,000. It is depicting something lower than that. That's what it looks like. Okay. So 25,000 is showing the mean. So it takes the median. So median is not being shown here. We can, what was the median here for the which field we are drawing here? The median house value. So median house value, the median is some problem. This one is actually the mean, and then this is the first quartile. So below that, no, sorry, this is the 50%. So that's the mid quartile. This one is the first quartile. Then this line, so we see this one is my value of Q1. This is the value of Q3. And after that, what we do is that we take this range and multiply that by 1.5. So that would mean that 1.5 multiplied by Q3 put the formulas interquartile range that we're talking about, so this is how we read the plot. So this one is the median. The midpoint is the median. We'll go back and check the value. Then the value below that, from where the box start, is actually the value of Q1. The upper part is the value of Q3. Now we take this interquartile range and then we multiply that by 1.5. You see here, we multiply that by 1.5 and then that becomes my, so it is called actually the box and the whisker plots. So the upper whisker is Q3 plus the interquartile range, and normally we multiply by 1.5, although now we have the freedom to define that whether it will be 1.25 or 1.75, or in some cases we can take even higher value, but by default it will be 1.5. So we take the upper quartile value, that is the Q3, then we take the interquartile range and multiply that by 1.5. That becomes the size of the upper whisker. Similarly, the same thing we do for the lower whisker, that is, we'll take the Q1 and then Q1 minus the interquartile range and multiply that by 1.5. That will give me the lower range. Why we are doing that is to say that if there are certain points which are outside this range, then normally we will treat them as outliers. So in the earlier example that we had taken, 100 would be depicted by this kind of dot, because that is lying outside the, now that is beyond the 1.5 times the interquartile range. That is the purpose of the box plot. So box plot is mainly used to identify the outliers, either on the lower side or on the upper side, and the formula is given here. So any questions on the box plot? So there are 4-5 things that we need to understand. The midpoint is the median. The lower level of the box is the value of Q1. The upper level is the value of Q3. Q3 minus Q1 is my IQR, or the interquartile range. We take that range, we multiply that by 1.5. So I have 1.5 times the interquartile range. I add that to the value of Q3 and that gives me the upper whisker. I deduct that from the Q1 value and that gives me the size of the lower whisker. Now, whatever is, if there are certain data points which is outside this range, which is being shown here, it means that there are certain records, or there are some number of records which are actually outside the interquartile range or outside the whisker. These are the points that I need to investigate, that whether these are outliers which we should remove from our database or should we retain that. So if we are keeping this, then we should be aware that all my mean values will be getting distorted, and I should have a process to handle that. Otherwise, I can use the median based computation techniques, because these numbers, even though they're outliers, they will not affect my computation because I'm using the median based computation. So that's the one way to understand my data, that does it really contain a few data elements which should be considered as outliers and which will have an disproportionate influence on certain measures that we have, like the average. So we have seen the describe function. We can plot that. We can do a box plot to find out that even though I have, say, 1,000 records or 20,000 records, are there certain records which are outlier in nature, do not really gel with rest of the data sets. Now we will, the Other thing to understand is that we have this data set, but how symmetrical are they? Okay, so let's see what is the symmetry of data. So first, let's see this data set. When we say symmetry, it is symmetry around the central tendency, symmetry around the mean, symmetry around the median. And what do we mean by symmetry? Visually, does it look the similar on both sides of the mean? So this data set is more or less symmetrical. Let me draw a more smooth curve using this data. So the same data will become like this. So I am using a smoothing factor here. So both of these you see are very symmetrical around the mean. And in this case, if the data is symmetrical, you will find that the mean and median will be almost the same. So if it is symmetrical, then we see that so either the data set is very symmetrical or it is skewed. So if it is not symmetrical, if there is one side of the data is having more, number of data elements and the other side is having less number of data elements, then we would say that my data set is not symmetrical. But how do we measure or how do we quantify the symmetricity of the data? Whether how symmetrical are they? That's what we do in the statistics. That visually or we can say that yes, this data is more or less symmetrical, but not completely, because you can see that both sides are not exactly the mirror image of the other. So if one side or the left side of the mean and the right side of the mean are the mirror image of the other, then they are completely symmetrical. But if they are not, then we need to have a measure of symmetricity, and that is being done by two things we call as skewness and kurtosis. So how do we measure the symmetricity? One is that whether they are equal number of data sets on both sides or not, and that we measure by skewness. So let's see one data set. We will run this one. Now I have just taken an example by giving certain random numbers, and that's how this graph was drawn. Now we go back to our housing data set, which we are trying to understand. So here again, just for the sake of demonstration, I draw another data set. Now, what does it look like? It is different from this. It is not as symmetrical as the first graph was. So you see the values of the skewness here. If it is symmetrical, the value of a skewness is very close to 0. So here, if you see, it is just 0.05. So it is not completely symmetrical, but very close to symmetrical in that, because the skewness number is very close to 0. How to compute skewness? We don't really need to go into the mathematics of that, but what is more important is to be able to interpret that and understand. The formulas anyway I will give you, but the beauty of working in data science nowadays that you don't really need to remember the formula. You need to remember the concepts, that what does this skewness mean. And of course, if you understand the formula, well and good, but that's not really a must. So the skewness is the measure of the symmetricity, that how the data points are spread around the mean. So if there are more data points on the left side, we said that the data is left skewed. It means that on the left side you have more data points compared to the right side of the median. So here you see, because this data set is skewed, the number is now higher The skewness number is higher, it is 0.72 compared to just 0.05 here. So the skewness is higher, and if the number is negative, if the skewness number is negative, it means that it is skewed to the left. So from the center of the table, from the center of the data, you can see that more data points are actually on the left side of the center than the right side, and that's why we will call this as this data set is skewed to the left. And when it is skewed to the left, the skewness number would be negative and skewness number would be higher. Now, typically the benchmark that we take is that if this skewness number or even the kurtosis number is going beyond plus or minus 1, then we say that this data set is not really a normal data set. So if the data set will be called normal data set, if the skewness and kurtosis both are either 0 or very close to 0, then we will say that my data is normally distributed. But if the data set is left distributed, the skewness number would be in negative. If it is right distributed, so let's draw the data set which is right distributed. So here if you see, this data set is having more number of data elements which are on the right side of the center of the data set or right side of the median. So here you see that the skewness number is positive because it is skewed to the right, and since this is the skewness is much higher, the value is actually gone beyond 1. So if the skewness number is beyond 1, then we need to investigate further that do we really need to do certain adjustment to data or should we just proceed with that. So it's good to know what is the skewness. Then we come to the kurtosis. Kurtosis gives you the data on, or it is a measure of how the data is centered around the peak. So if you see, let's take some more example, that in some cases you will have a very sharp peak, or most of the data will be centered around the peak and not really dispersed too much. So if you see, I have taken one data set, as you can see here, as we will run this once again. Now, this data set we have got, and you can see that the data set, it has a very sharp peak. So a large majority of my observations, a large majority of my data elements are around the peak itself, and there are few in numbers, there are very few which are away from the peak. So kurtosis is a measure of what we can call is the peakedness of the data. Peakedness of the data, or how, so in this data set, this is the peak and these are the tails. So as it tails off on both sides, we call this part as a tail. So if the data is having a sharper peak and most of the data is around the peak, and less of and it has a thin tail, then we say that kurtosis is high. And if it is more equally spread, then the peak would be not that sharp, and the tails would be what we call as the fat tails. So here the tails are light and the peak is higher, or the peak is sharp, and there could be another data set which may look like this. So if you see here, it does not have a very sharp peak like this, and it has a thick tails. So this kind of data set, the kurtosis would be negative. So here you can see that kurtosis value is -1. It means that this does not have, this is a very flat kind of data set. And if we have the kurtosis number as more than 1, and if it is positive, then we'll say that then we should understand that my data set is actually having a sharper peak, it means that a lot of data is just around the mean, and dispersion of the data is not that much. So skewness is that whether my data set is on symmetrically distributed, or it is left skewed or the right skewed. Kurtosis is the measure of whether I have a fat tail or I have a sharp peak. Okay, so these are the ways that we describe our data, and that would be measured by the skewness and kurtosis. Any questions so far? So these are the statistical concepts also that you need to understand, as we have discussed very briefly earlier, is that to be able to understand the concepts in data science and later on as you move into machine learning, there are certain basic concepts in statistics that you should be aware of. Most of these you will have learned in high school mathematics, but I know that all those things do not remain in our memory. So I'm just trying to refresh for those who have studied these kind of things in high school mathematics. But it's important to recall these basic concepts, like the concept of the central tendency versus the concept of dispersion, and what are the specific measures that we use for both of these, central tendency as well as the dispersion. So for dispersion, the two key things are the skewness and the kurtosis. Dispersion we can also measure by the interquartile range. Dispersion and the range by itself is an important measure of dispersion, that is the max minus min. So let's go to our presentation to revisit a few things. So we talked about the measure of central tendency, mean, median, mode. Mean and median are the more important things for us. Then we come to the measure of dispersion. So the first important measure is the range itself, which is a simple thing, min minus max minus min. Then we talked about the skewness or the symmetry of distribution. So you see here that if the data is distributed like this, it goes here. And you see this line coming here. So if the data is something, our distribution of data when we draw a histogram is something like this, then we call that this is the shape of the normal distribution. And if it is normal distribution, then the skewness would be 0, kurtosis would be 0, because they are completely symmetrical. But in some cases, you will have like this, which is skewed to the right. If it is skewed to the right, then the skewness value would be more than 0. And this one is skewed to the left, and the skewness number would be less than 0. Similarly, when it comes to kurtosis, in the normal distribution, it will look like this. This peak here, if it is more peaked, then the kurtosis would be positive. If it is less peaked, like the bottom one, then the kurtosis would be negative. In both of these measures, if the values go beyond +1 or -1, then our data is, not, we say that our data is non-normal. And what is the implication of being non-normal? We will see that. We'll come back to variance. Just let me go to the normal. Yeah. So if the data set, when we say that my data set is normal distribution, and this is the ideal state, not everything would be normally distributed, and that's where we measure the kurtosis and skewness. But if the data is normally distributed, what is the property of a normal distribution? So if property of the, how do we know that it is normally distributed? When it is when the kurtosis and skewness both are zero. And when both are zero, it will take this kind of shape. That is, just to recall, what does this shape represent? This shape is representing the frequency of the data set, a frequency of the data that we have, which is being depicted, the value of which is being depicted on the x-axis. So what it means is that most of the data in this data set, the highest number of occurrence is of the value 0. Then as we move to the left, that is, as we move from 0 to -5, the frequency or the count of those data elements continues to go down. So if we take the example of our uh, time taken from home to office, this peak would be half an hour, because that is what the most frequently occurring time. Most of the time I take half an hour, so this peak will actually be half an hour. Now, as we move away from the average or the most likely, either on the higher side or on the lower side, the frequency of those events, it means that the frequency of the or the number of days on which I take, say, 23 minutes, would be slightly lower than the average, but still it would be close to the average. And as I go away from that, that how many days I reach only in, say, 20 minutes, that number will continue to drop. So what this normal distribution normally tells you is that data is normally distributed when you have the most likely event or the average. And then from there, as we go farther, either on the lower side or on the higher side, the frequency or the number of occurrences, they go on reducing. So if the data is normally distributed, then you will see that we can measure that what is the likelihood that you will be reaching office between 20 and 25 minutes. What is the likelihood that you will be reaching the office between 25 minutes and 30 minutes? Those computations can be done with a fair degree of precision if the data is normally distributed. We'll go into the statistics of that earlier, but that we can do after we have computed certain other measures like the variance and standard deviation. So we'll go into the concept of, I will refresh the concept of the variance and standard deviation for you. So we're talking about the dispersion around the mean, and we're trying to quantify it. Dispersion around the mean means how far away the data points are from the average, but we need to quantify it. Now, the two main ways that we quantify it is called the variance and the standard deviation. Now, in process of quantification, that how far away my data is spread compared to the average, what the first thing is do that we measure the distance, that how far away my data points are compared to the average. So that will find out simply by finding out the difference between the average and the data points. If my average was 30 minutes, and on, say, some given day I reach at 27, one day I reach at 25 minute, another day 23 minute. So for each of these occurrences, I find out the distance from the average. So if my average is 30, one day I reach at 27 minutes. Now the difference between the average and that particular occurrence is -3. Or similarly, if I take 33 minutes, that would be 3 minutes difference. Now, what happens is that if I just take a simple sum of that, then the plus and minus would cancel out. And I would get as the dispersion is actually 0, because on one day I took the average plus 3 minutes, on the other day I took average minus 3 minutes. So if I take just a simple sum of plus and minus, it will cancel out and I will not get any insight into the dispersion. And therefore, to remove this cancellation process, we take the square of both of these, because when we do the square of the negative number, that will also become positive. So we take the square of that, and then since I am trying to compute the variance of the entire data set, I'll compute this variance and take the square for each data element in my data set and take a sum of that. Now, having taken the sum, I want to take the average dispersion or the average variance. So I divide that by n or n minus 1. N, when I am talking about a population, and here let me again introduce the concept of the two concepts, the concept of the population and the concept of the sample. So population is that if we are studying something and if we are taking data for everyone or everything which is relevant for that study, then that would be called population. So for example, if we are doing a study of our customers, and if I have the data about all my customers, then that becomes the population. But if I say that, okay, I have millions and millions of customers, and rather than taking data of all the customers, I will take a sample or a subset of that. That's called a sample. You would be hearing these terms very frequently when the elections come and the opinion polls are done. So the opinion polls are, they don't go to every voter and ask about the question. So they will give you the sample size that this prediction of the opinion poll or was done based on the survey done of say 20,000 people or 30,000 people. So that's the sample size. So even though there are 50 crore voters, the question was asked only to maybe 30,000 people. Why do we do that? First of all, it's not just possible to go and ask every voter, because that, so the actual counting of the votes is actually the, we are dealing with the population of the people who voted, because every vote is counted. But the opinion polls are drawing a sample and then trying to say that whatever this sample is saying, the population will also say the same thing. So sample actually should be drawn in a way that it represents the population. So if you're dealing with the population, we divide that by the entire number. So if the population is say 10 crore, then I'll do the entire computation for 10 crore and divide that by 10 crore. But if we are taking a sample, we do it n minus 1. It means that if my sample size is say 100, I'll take this entire measure for all the 100 data points. I'll take the sum of all the 100 data points. But for finding the average, I take it n minus 1. It means that I'll divide that only by 99. Now, why for a sample I take n minus 1? That is something that we don't need to get into. That goes into some deeper theory of statistics, that why it gives us a better representation compared to dividing that by n if we are talking about a sample. So we'll not go into that. It is important to understand the concept of the population, the concept of the sample, and then if I am drawing my variance measure or my standard deviation, then after taking the sum of all the data elements, I divide that by n minus 1. So let's understand this a bit better by doing the computation in the Excel sheet. Well, if you can see my Excel sheet. So you see I have taken just some data set. So I have 10 data elements in my data set, which is seen here. So I compute an average here. I will just highlight that. So I compute the average, which for this data set comes to 35.7. Then I measure the distance from the average. So if you see the formula here, it is A3, which is this data, minus the average. So I compute the distance for each of these data elements from the average. So all of these are how far away they are from the average. So 16, so 35.7 is the average, and if the data point is 16, my distance from the average is minus 19.7. Then I take the square of it. So as you can see the formula here, I take the square of whatever is the distance here. and this square is taken to ensure that the plus and minus don't really cancel out. Now, having taken the square, I take the sum of the squares, and then I compute the variance by dividing the sum by whatever is the count of numbers I have in my data set. So I have 10 elements minus 1 because I'm treating this as a sample for some bigger population. So I get my variance here. And the square root of variance, so now since we have taken the square of this one, if I want the real measure, I take the square root of this number. So first I take the distance, then we square it, then we sum it. Now since we want to take the average, we'll divide that by the number of data elements we have, and that number will be the exact number of the data elements if it is population. If it is a sample, then we take n minus 1. That's how we arrive at this number, and we call it variance. But since we've taken the square of the number, we take the square root of whatever is the variance, and that's called the standard deviation. So now this becomes my another measure of dispersion. So for the data set, you will see that I can average, which is the mean, and the standard deviation. These two become the key characteristics of any of the data set. That is where it is centered and how is the standard deviation. So if the standard deviation number is larger, then we know that it is more flat kind of data set. Okay. If you see here, for another data set, the average is 33, and the variance is, and the standard deviation is 16.2. So by seeing these numbers itself, you can find out that the second data set is more dispersed compared to the first one, because here the average is actually lower than this, but the standard deviation is actually higher than this. It means that it is more broadly spread around the mean. So that's how we compute the variance and the standard deviation. And the same thing, if we express in terms of the formula, it will look like this. So if you are taking the variance with, so the sign that we use is the sigma. So sigma square is the variance, and this is the formula where we take the mu is the average, and x is your individual data elements. So we take the individual data elements minus mu is the average, and then we take the square of that, we take the sum of that and divide that by n if it is population, and if it is a sample, then we do the same computation and divide that by n minus 1, and if I take the square root of that, that becomes the standard deviation. So that's the mathematical formula. We don't always have to remember that, but it is easy to say that, it is easy to remember that first we see how each of the data element is away from the center. We measure that by finding out the difference, then we take a square of it, then we sum that, then we divide that by n or n minus 1 depending upon whether it is population data or a sample data. And if you want to find out this standard deviation, we take a square root of that. Okay. Then you will also come across a very important concept, what is called the z-score. So now in the example of how much time we take to reach office, my average was 30 minutes. And suppose on one day I reach in 27 minutes. So first, the simple distance, we said that it is 3 minutes on one given day. But having computed the standard deviation, we also compute the distance of a given data point from the mean in terms of the standard deviation. It means how much standard deviation away a data point is from the mean. So if we go back to the our Excel sheet, having computed the standard deviation, let's compute the z-score. So z-score we are saying is a distance in represented in terms of the standard deviation. So my distance from the average is 1.3, and if I divide this by the standard deviation, that is 13.9, that gives me the z-score. I need to freeze this one. Just put it down. So this one shows that how much standard deviation away a given data point is from the mean. So you are seeing here that 11 is minus 1.83 standard deviations away from the mean. So in terms of the absolute numbers, it was the difference was 24.7. In terms of the standard deviation, it is 1.83 standard deviations away from the mean. Now, these numbers are very significant numbers, and we will be dealing with these more frequently than the absolute numbers, because the absolute numbers for different data sets or given the different data set, the absolute numbers will actually become very difficult to deal with, because some data element may range from 10 to 100, some other data element will range from 10,000 to 100,000, and therefore I can't really compare the dispersion. I can't even compare the standard deviation, because suppose here these numbers, let me put a very large number. So I use the function of the Excel band between 1000 to 2000. So for the second data set, I'm not taking similar number, I am taking large numbers. So I have these very large numbers here. What happens now? My standard deviation is becoming 309 for this data set, and the standard deviation is only 13 for this data set, because obviously here this data set contains some small numbers and this one contains larger numbers. But I want to see that both of them, what is the dispersion, or how each of these data elements are away from that. So if I take the Z score and copy that here, the C15 becomes F15. I have introduced one more column in between, and that's why the relationship was not holding. So now you see the data that we are seeing, both of these numbers now can be compared. And you see here that very few numbers are actually, in terms of the standard deviation, many of these are actually very close to the center. No, I think done something wrong here. This is, okay, the distance. Distance divided by the standard now. This is correct because my average is here. Okay, fine. So let's change it to some number 5,000, and then you will see that it is far away from them. So the Z score will actually reduce irrespective of what is the degree of these numbers that we have. So here, what is the order of these numbers? So here we have everything in double digits. Here we have everything in thousands, and therefore just the standard deviation comparison doesn't really help us. These standard deviations have to be compared along with the mean. So I also see that the mean or the average is also in thousand, and therefore the standard deviation also should be in thousands. And the Z score, or the difference measured in terms of the standard deviation, that gives me that how far the data point is from the center. So this Z square, where do we use? We'll go back to our presentation, and we were talking about earlier. I showed you this. Now, having computed the Z score, this is what is being shown here in the bottom. If you see this part, which is showing you -4 sigma, -1 sigma, and so on. You see these numbers? So what it is showing is that this is the average or the mu or the mean, and this distance is showing that -1 sigma, and sigma was my standard deviation. So if you see, if the data is normally distributed, now we say that between plus and minus, so the area which is covered between plus and minus 1 sigma, which is this area, sorry, I got it from here. So this area, that is a -1 sigma to plus 1 sigma. You go from here. This area, so having computed the sigma or the standard deviation, now we can say with fair degree of confidence that the average plus minus 1 sigma will contain 68% of the observations. Similarly, if you go to plus minus 2 sigma, that is, if we extend the range plus minus 2 sigma, we'll say that this area will contain 90.5% of the observations and things like that. That's how we use the sigma, because once we say that the distribution is normal and I know the mean, I know the standard deviation, then we can compute that how many records will be there in which area. So that's the significance of that. So let's go back to our Excel sheet, and just to make the concept very clear. Now suppose this was the time which I am taking to reach office, and there are 10 days of data which I have. Okay, so the average time which I take to reach office is about 36 minutes. I have computed the standard deviation, and I'm assuming that this is my normal distribution. What it means is that my average was 35.7, and therefore I will compute the range now. So one sigma range would be my average, plus the standard deviation, and then I'll take again the average minus the standard deviation. What does it mean? It means is that 60 out of, I have this 10 days of data, but based on this computation, I can say with confidence that on 68 out of the 100 days, I will reach my office anywhere between 22 minutes and 49 minutes. And on 90% of the days, I'll reach office between 2 sigma range, so 2 into the standard deviation, and this one will be so on 90% of the days, I will actually reach between 8 minutes and 62 minutes. Now, as you will see that the time that we take to reach office will normally not be distributed with a, no, it will not be a normal distribution, because if it takes on a normal day 35 minutes, very unlikely that I will reach office in 8 minutes. But because the traffic and all that, we may take more time. So this data may not be normally distributed, and therefore, when I apply this principle, it may not really work on that. And that is where the measure of the skewness and the kurtosis was important, because if you have this data and if you measure the skewness and the kurtosis, then you will find that it is not really symmetrical. But assuming that if it is symmetrical, then this one will work very fine. It will tell you that there is a 68% probability that you will reach office, or there are, out of 100 days, 68 days, you will be reaching office within the range of 22 minutes and 49 minutes. And on 90 out of 100 days, you will actually make to office between 8 minutes and 62 minutes. Okay. That's how we can now extrapolate different kinds of things. So if you ask the question that, now you tell me what is the probability that you will reach office in less than 25 minutes. Now we can compute with this normal distribution. So I'll find out the corresponding z-score, and what we are trying to find out is that what is the probability that I will reach office in less than 25 minutes. So we will take the distance between 30 and 25, so that becomes 5. We'll take the z-score of that. So if I'm trying to answer a question that given this data, how many times I will reach office, or what is the probability that I will reach office in less than 25 minutes, what we are doing, we are finding the z-score of 25. So we are 25 minus the average, and this I will divide by the standard deviation. So I am expressing again, finding the z-score of 25. That becomes minus 0.79. Now, if we come back to this place, then we will try to locate that where is the 0.79 probability. So we'll find out from this place and just assume that this was 0.79. So this one is 1 sigma. It will come somewhere here. So it will come maybe somewhere here. And we'll see that this area will represent that I will reach office in less than 25 minutes. So I find out the z-score of 25 in that data set, where the average is 30 and the standard deviation was 13. So we find out the Z score, and with the help of the Z score, now I can tell you with fair degree of confidence that here this is what is showing 15% is this area. So maybe roughly about 16 out of 100 days, I will reach office in less than 25 minutes. And I can do all kinds of computations here. So that's how we compute the variance and the standard deviation and the Z score. So these three things are very important, and these three things you should be able to recall. It means that these should be memorized, that what is the concept of variance, what is the concept of standard deviation, what is the concept of the Z score. Because if you're really looking for an entry into data science, these are also some of the frequently asked questions in the interviews, and therefore you should be clear about how to compute and how to use these um, concepts in our data analysis. So we saw we are trying to understand the data set that we have got. At first, we got a feel of the different attributes, what is the shape and size, how many columns we have, what those columns represent. And then we are doing the second stage of the data analysis, which is the understanding it from the statistical point of view. And there, the different types of measures that we do is central tendency, where the data is centered around for each of the data field that we have got. What is the center of that data? Then how the data is dispersed around the center, and then we come for the measurement of certain dispersions. And these measurements are, we can see it by histogram visually. Then we can compute the skewness and the kurtosis. Skewness tells me that how symmetrically data is represented around the mean. Kurtosis tells me that are they centered around the mean or are they really dispersed? So higher the kurtosis, higher would be the either the peakedness or the dispersion. If it is peaked around the center, then the number would be negative, and if it is no, if it is peaked around the center, it was if it is peaked around the center, the number would be positive, and if it is more flat, then the number would be negative. That's how we have now got a feel of the statistical feel of the data. And then we can also measure the dispersion in terms of the standard deviation and the variance. So these are the, so we have now a good feel of our data. The other thing that we will cover today is also the correlation. It means that the different data elements that I have got in my housing data set. So we'll come to the table. You have got these 9 different fields. So are they correlated between with each other, or are they different from each other? So for example, here we are seeing that given the data of the house, the number of total rooms and number of total bedrooms obviously should have a higher correlation. It means that if the number of bedrooms are higher, typically the number of rooms also should be higher, because here the data we have got is for a given district or a given area of the city. And therefore in that area, these both of these things will actually correlate with the number of households. It means that the number of houses that we are seeing, if the number of houses are higher in a given district, then the number of bedrooms also would be higher and the number of total rooms also would be higher. So these three elements should ideally be highly correlated. Also, the population is the number of people living in those houses, which also should have a higher correlation with the number of households, because if you have more number of houses, more number of households, obviously the people living in those houses would also be higher. But these need not necessarily be having a correlation with the median income. And possibly the correlation would be negative because richer people, they will have bigger houses and maybe less number of people live in those houses, or less number of people live in, the ratio of the total rooms versus the population would be lesser in the rich localities compared to the poor localities. So there is a mathematical way to find out. So, and why do we need to go this mathematical way? Because visually we can find out that whether this data is correlated or not. But since we are having 20,000 records, I mean, you would not be able to inspect those 20,000 records and come to a conclusion that whether there is a high correlation or not. And therefore, we need to use the computing power of machine to find out some of these things. And also, visually, you will not be able to quantify, and we need to do the quantification. So, for example, when we go back here, I had two different data sets. One was this data set, and one was this data set. Now, if I ask a question to you that do you see a correlation between the two, and what do we mean by the correlation in the layman's term? We will say that okay, if higher the data in data set 1, that is higher the value of x, if y also moves in the same direction. So for example, when it is 37, here the number is 1580. Now it increases from 37 to 43, but this one comes down. Now when it goes down further, here also we are seeing a tendency of going down further. So that doesn't look to be very, strong correlation. Sometimes when this goes up, this goes down. This is going down, this is also going down. Then again from 16, it goes up to 27. Here also it goes up to 19. And it goes up almost, doubles from 27 to 48, but this one comes down. So we are seeing that the movement of these is not really in the same direction. And therefore, it looks like that these two data set, they don't have a very high correlation. But we need a mathematical measure for finding out that whether these two data sets have a good correlation or not. It means that if one goes up, whether the other also goes up. Or is it the other way around, that one goes up and then the other one goes down? This is what we're trying to find out. And that is done by what we call as the correlation coefficient. So what we do is, we'll just see the computation of that. All these numbers we already have. We multiply column So rather than taking the square of this, what we are doing in the variance, when we're talking about the covariance, we have two different data sets. The distances that we have calculated, we'll take a multiplication of that. So distance in the data set 1 versus the first data element in data set 2. We'll take the multiplication of that. Again, we'll take the sum of that. We'll take this. So here, this will be called covariance. And this one is called correlation. If you're talking about two different data sets. Okay. So this one gives me a measure. So if the correlation is minus 0.63, it means that these are actually moving in opposite direction. So the sign, if the sign is negative, it means that both the data sets we are trying to compare, they have a negative correlation. It means that if one goes up, the other would go down. And the numbers here will show the degree of correlation. So if it is 0, this means that there is no correlation at all. If it is -1, it means that there is a perfect negative correlation. It means that if one goes by 1%, the other will go down by 1%. And if this is +1, it means that it is perfectly correlated. It means that both of them move in the same direction with the same speed. Okay. So that's the another measure that we need to have, and this one will be between two different data sets. So as we come here, then we can find out the correlation. What shall we do with these? We will handle in the future sessions, but today we are just focusing on understanding how to describe my data set, how to understand my data set in terms of statistics. So again, I can compute the correlation by giving a simple command, and this is from the Python library. So I call the data frame and dot correlation. I store that to a variable, and then I see these numbers. So that number will somewhere look like this. So now in this one, I am showing the correlation of all the data elements which I have. So I have 9 numerical data elements versus everything else. So if you see these diagonally, it is all 1, 1, 1, because the correlation between the longitude and longitude, it means that if you take the correlation between the same data set, it will be 1. As I said, that if the value is 1, it means that there is a perfect correlation. So if I take the same data set, there is a perfect correlation. Then let's see some number. We were talking about the correlation between total rooms. So we'll take this row. Total rooms and correlation of that with total bedrooms. So if you see here, this is 0.93. 0.93 is very high. It means that the data which I have for total bedrooms and data which I have for total rooms, both of them have a very high correlation. It means that both of them move together. Now the significance of that in data analytics is like this, that if I have two different data elements which are very highly correlated, then as a data scientist, I ask the question, then do I really need both of them? Because if I have just one of them, I know what the other value would be, because they're perfectly correlated or there is very high correlation. So if I understand the correlation, I ask the question that should I keep both of these columns or both of these features, total bedrooms and total rooms, in my data set, or do I remove one of them? If I remove one of them, it's not going to affect me, because if I know the total rooms, I more or less know the total bedrooms also. And if I have, say, tens of thousands of such data elements in a much bigger data set, then my computation actually becomes much easier. I don't really have to compute everything again for total rooms and total bedrooms. I can just remove one of them and my computation becomes much easier. Also, in certain types of analytics that we'll do in future, for example, regression, if you have several things which have a very high correlation, then it does not give me a very good regression. The prediction capability of the regression actually goes down if there are too many elements in the data set which are highly correlated. So especially when we are running regression, we need to ensure that we remove the data elements which are highly correlated. So because of those properties, we need to understand the correlation between different features which we have in the data set. How to compute the correlation, that I have shown you. But I am emphasizing once again that understanding the computation process, understanding the formula is not really very important in today's world, because all these computations are being given to you with just one line command and the system computes. What is more important is to understand the concept and understand how to use those concepts. So here the concept of correlation is that if the data sets move together, it means that if the value go up in one data set, you will see a higher value in the another data element also. Then they are highly correlated. If one goes up, the other goes down, they are negatively correlated. And if the correlation value is 1, it means that they are perfectly correlated. If the value is -1, it means that they are perfectly correlated, but in a negative way. It means that if one goes up by 1%, the other will go down by 1%. So it's more important to understand what correlation is and why do we use it. And I gave you one example, that we need to ask the question that if the total bedrooms and total rooms, both of them are having the same, uh, both of them are having a correlation of 1, it means that if both of them are actually representing the same thing, and therefore do I really need them? And that is the context in which we use the correlation numbers. Now, this is how we can see it. And I have used here the heat map, which is called the cool warm. It means that if the number is higher, it will show me with a deeper red. If the number is lower, it will show me in deeper blue. So it becomes much easier to read. I can just focus my eyes on seeing the deep blue numbers. So I see here a very high correlation between the longitude and the latitude. Other high numbers, no, yeah. So the other high numbers on the negative side, there is none. So I can find out very easily. The positive correlations, these 111, I need to ignore because these are the correlation with oneself. Otherwise, I have high correlation between latitude and longitude. And you will see that these numbers will actually repeat here because the correlation between the latitude and longitude will be the same as the correlation between longitude and latitude. So you will see that it's actually on, if we divide this table diagonally, every number would repeat. Then we see that there is a high correlation between total rooms and total bedrooms. There's also a high correlation between population, that is 0.88, population and the total bedrooms. We also have a very high correlation between the households and the total bedrooms and so on. So I identify, as we were expecting, the system is also giving me a very high correlation between the fields which we were expecting to be highly correlated, but here we are able to quantify it. I know that today's session was a bit heavy, uh, and the process which I have been following till now is that we will introduce these concepts and we will keep revisiting these concepts so that the problem of not being able to remember or not able to grasp everything in the first go, that problem does not occur. So we will keep visiting these concepts frequently as we go along. So don't worry if you uh, don't remember some of these things. I will try to keep, repeating these things as we go along, the concepts as well as the principles, and how do we interpret, how do we use that. So don't get overwhelmed by whatever we are discussing. As we discuss this some 3 times or 4 times, I'm sure that you will understand. And some of these things you have already done in your school maths. So, but most of us don't really remember what we did in the schools. So I will continue to repeat some of these things because these are very important concepts for a data scientist to understand. So, any questions from today's discussion?
Not from me.
Okay. So today's session is, especially for today's session, I would urge you to maybe go through the video once again and look into the sections where you are not very comfortable with. And I know that some of these concepts and some we have introduced some 10 different terminology. For some of you, it may be overwhelming. So listen to those segments of the uh, video once again. Go through the Excel sheet, the PPT, and the um, notebook also in your spare time so that you are grasping these concepts because some of the foundation or the building blocks of most of the analytics would be lying in the concept that we are discussing here. So again, to repeat, the formula, don't focus too much on the formulas. You will get lost in the beginning. So just focus on the concept that what is the concept of the central tendency. It actually tells me what is the data point, which is the most likely scenario. Then dispersion means that yes, there are other data elements which are spread around the average or the median. And the measurement of those things are called the measurement of the dispersion. There are various measures of dispersion. How do we see that? Then we talked about correlation. So with this, I will end the session today if there are no further questions, and then we'll meet again tomorrow. Okay,
Thank you.
thanks.